Bruce Lee was fighting when Robert Clouse, his director, thought he was just an actor, and then Bruce Lee was struggling when Robert Clouse, his director, thought he was just an actor, and then the truth exploded. The set of Enter the Dragon buzzed with the energy of a Hollywood production in its 1970s heyday. Warm lights bathed the Shaolin Temple set, while extras dressed as monks moved in sync, rehearsing the choreography that Bruce Lee had meticulously designed. But something was wrong. Robert Clouse, the director, watched from his chair with a cup of coffee in his hand, impatient. He had a very clear vision for the film, a stylized martial arts spectacle, with choreographed movements, slow cameras, and a charismatic hero that would captivate Western audiences. Bruce Lee, however, was not following the script as he imagined. "Cut!" Clouse shouted, standing up abruptly. "Bruce, you're exaggerating. This is not a documentary, it is a film. We need more drama, more theatricality." Bruce stopped mid-motion, sweat dripping down his forehead. His normally serene eyes now burned with an intensity that made some of the team members flinch. He took a deep breath, trying to contain his frustration. "Robert, this is drama," he said, his voice low but cutting. "Every blow, every block, is a story. If you want the audience to feel the weight of every movement, you need to let the fight be real. It's not about pretending. It's about living." Clouse crossed his arms, skeptical. "Bruce, you're an actor. A great actor. But I direct the film. If I want you to punch the air and pretend you hit someone, that's what we're going to do." A heavy silence fell over the set. The assistants exchanged nervous glances. Bruce looked at the ground for a moment, as if he was calculating something. Then, without warning, he turned to one of the extras, a tall, muscular man playing one of the temple guards. "You," Bruce said, pointing. "Come here." The extra hesitated, looking at Clouse for approval. The director frowned but gave a reluctant nod. Bruce positioned the man a few steps away. "Now attack me." "In truth." "What?" Clouse almost spilled his coffee. "Bruce, that's not in the script." "It doesn't have to be," Bruce replied, without taking his eyes off the extra. "Let's show you what a real fight is." The man advanced, hesitantly at first, but then with more confidence, throwing a punch. Bruce dodged with an almost supernatural lightness, counterattacking with a quick kick that stopped inches from the extra's chest. The movement was so precise, so alive, that the air seemed to vibrate. "Cut!" Clouse shouted again, but Bruce ignored him. "Now, imagine this in slow motion," Bruce said, turning to the director. "Imagine the audience seeing every muscle contract, every drop of sweat. It's not choreography. It's art." The extra tried another attack, this time with more force. Bruce blocked, turned and applied an armbar that made the man fall to his knees. It wasn't a rehearsed move. It was pure instinct, the essence of Jeet Kune Do, the art Bruce had created. Clouse watched, mouth open. The entire team was paralyzed. No one dared to interrupt. "Do you see?" Bruce released the helper, helping him to get up. "That's what I bring to the film. I'm not an actor pretending to fight. I'm a fighter living the fight." Clouse ran a hand over his face, processing what he had just witnessed. He had worked with action stars before, but had never seen anything like this. It wasn't performance. It was true. "Okay," he finally said, his voice lower. "Let's redo the scene." "Your way." Bruce smiled, not with triumph, but with relief. "Thanks." And when the cameras started rolling again, Enter the Dragon stopped being just another martial arts movie. It became a masterpiece, not because it followed Hollywood rules, but because it broke them. In the following days, Clouse abandoned the rigid choreography and allowed Bruce to improvise. The fights gained an organic fluidity, a poetic brutality that captivated the public. And when the film premiered in 1973, it wasn't just a box office success. It was a revolution. Bruce Lee wasn't just an actor. He was a martial artist, a philosopher, a man who turned every movement into a statement. And Robert Clouse, without realizing it, had just directed the film that would immortalize Bruce's legacy forever. But, like every great story, this one also had its price. Behind the scenes, tension between Bruce and the film industry was growing. Producers wanted to control him, studios wanted to mold him into something he wasn't. And Bruce, tired of fighting not just on screen but off, began to question whether Hollywood was the right place for him. One night, after a long recording session, Bruce sat alone in his dressing room, looking in the mirror. His reflection showed an exhausted man, but with fire in his eyes. "I can't just be what they want," he muttered to himself. "It has to be me." And so, while Enter the Dragon conquered the world, Bruce Lee was already planning his next move. "I would no longer be an actor. I would no longer be a studio fighter. He would be himself. And the world would never be the same again." The weight of legacy. Bruce looked in the mirror, his fingers tracing the outline of a barely noticeable scar below his left eyebrow, a reminder of a real, unchoreographed fight in a Hong Kong alley years before. That brand was his truth, something Hollywood would never understand. The studios wanted a polished hero, a fighter with calculated movements, but he carried within him the raw violence of the streets, the fury of someone who had survived ambushes and betrayals. Outside the dressing room, muffled voices were arguing. "It was always the same thing, Bruce, we need more dialogue scenes, American audiences don't understand this style, why don't we make you more digestible?" He clenched his fists, feeling his joints crack. It wasn't just about being understood. It was about being respected. That same night, as the studio hallways emptied, Bruce found Linda at home, sitting at the kitchen table with a book on Eastern philosophy in her hands. She looked up, immediately noticing the shadow on his face. "They want me to cut my hair," he said, throwing the keys on the table with a metallic clink. "They say the bun is very Chinese." Linda closed the book slowly, her fingers marking the page. "And what did you say?" "That my hair is non-negotiable." She smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "You know it won't stop there." Bruce knew. He had already turned down roles that reduced him to a stereotype, the exotic servant, the slant-eyed villain. Enter the Dragon had been a victory, but even there, the producers had tried to soften his persona, asking for more smiles, less intensity. He had fought for every frame, for every Mandarin word they left in the script. But now, with the film about to explode, they tightened their grip. "I can't go on like this," he murmured, sitting down next to her. "Every time I accept a commitment, I feel like I'm betraying something bigger." Linda held his hand. "Then don't accept it." The seed of rebellion. Days later, Bruce received an unexpected invitation, a dinner with Raymond Chow, producer of Golden Harvest, in Hong Kong. The American studios treated him like an employee, but Chow looked at him like a partner. During the flight, Bruce scribbled notes in a notebook with ideas for a film that would be his, without interference. A project where every movement, every word, would carry its philosophy. He would call it Game of Death. At the restaurant, between dishes of Peking duck and jasmine tea, Chow was direct. "Americans don't know what they have in their hands. But Hong Kong knows." Bruce lifted the cup, feeling the steam heat his face. "I want to do something that has never been done. A film that is not about fights, but about what is behind them." Chow smiled. "Then do it. I give you carte blanche." That was all Bruce needed to hear. But, as always, there was a price. Hollywood studios weren't going to let their top martial arts star get away without a fight. When the news broke, the threats began: broken contracts, lawsuits, boycotts. One executive even said in an angry phone call that he would never work anywhere again. Bruce hung up the phone and looked out the hotel window. Far below, the lights of Hong Kong twinkled like fallen stars. He was no longer the boy who had left the city years before, humiliated and aimless. Now, he was a man with a purpose. The last round. The following months were a silent war. While Enter the Dragon dominated the box office, Bruce immersed himself in the production of Game of Death, filming scenes in secret, away from the studio's eyes. He knew the film would be his final statement, a work where every blow, every look, would tell the world who he really was. But the body also had its limits. One morning, after hours of recording, Bruce felt a sharp pain in his head. It was as if a knife had pierced him behind the eyes. He leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, but the pain didn't go away. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed cerebral edema, the result of years of strenuous training, stress and, perhaps, the pressure of carrying a dream bigger than oneself. "You need to rest," said the doctor, seriously. "Or it will kill you." Bruce nodded, but didn't stop. He had a movie to finish. The Unfinished Legacy. On the morning of July 20, 1973, Bruce Lee was found unconscious in his apartment. Paramedics tried to revive him, but it was too late. The news spread like wildfire: the dragon was dead. The world cried. Enter the Dragon became a posthumous phenomenon, and Game of Death was released incomplete, with scenes recreated using stunt doubles and rushed edits. But for those who really knew it, the film was never about the ending. It was about the journey. Years later, in an abandoned studio in Hong Kong, they found Bruce's notes. Among sketches of fights and dialogues, one sentence stood out. "Don't pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one." And so, even in death, Bruce Lee continued to fight, no longer against studios or producers, but against oblivion. His legacy was not just that of a wrestler or actor, but that of a man who refused to be molded. Who chose to burn intensely, even though he knew it would consume him. And the world, in fact, was never the same again. The last roll of film. The abandoned studio smelled musty and dusty, but among the piles of dismantled sets and moldy film reels, something glistened in the dim light of a hanging lamp. It was a rusty metal can, with the words "Game of Death, Lost Scenes" handwritten in faded paint. Inside, there were not just negatives, but something more: a worn leather notebook, with yellowing pages and notes in 3 languages: English, Cantonese, and Mandarin. It was Bruce's diary. The first pages contained sketches of fights that were never filmed, a confrontation in a Buddhist temple, with opponents using long sticks and distorted Wing Chun techniques, a sequence in a night market, where each blow echoed among food stalls and red lanterns. But it was in the last notes that Bruce's true battle revealed itself. "They want me to be what I'm not. The studio sees me as a product, the fans as a myth, the kung fu masters as a traitor for teaching Westerners. But I'm none of them. I'm just a man trying to find his way, even if that path is lonely." One of the pages had dialogue crossed out and rewritten several times, as if he was struggling to find the right words. "Are you afraid of death?" "No. I'm afraid I didn't live." It was a scene that was never recorded. Maybe because, deep down, Bruce knew he was already answering that question every day. The studio ghost. In the months following the discovery, rumors spread throughout Hong Kong. Some said that, on full moon nights, a shadow moved among the abandoned scenes, practicing chi sa alone, as if it were still training for a fight that would never happen. Others swore they heard the sound of a muffled scream, the same one Bruce used in the movies to channel his strength, echoing through the empty hallways. A young production assistant, recently hired to digitize the old files, was the first to see something concrete. He was alone in the studio, transferring the last scenes of Game of Death to the computer, when the screen flickered. For a second, the image froze in a frame that wasn't in the official reels: Bruce, on his back, facing an invisible opponent. His body was taut, muscles defined in the cool light of the set, but there was something different, an expression that no stunt double or stand-in actor could replicate. It was the look of a man who knew he was about to lose. The assistant blinked, and the image disappeared. But the next day, when he reviewed the file, he found a note in the corner of the screen, written in a font that wasn't his. "Tell them I didn't stop. The last fight." Bruce Lee's legacy was never about perfection. It was about resistance. In the years that followed, Game of Death was reassembled dozens of times, extended versions, director's cuts, definitive edits. But none of them captured what really mattered, the feeling that, even incomplete, the film was a metaphor for Bruce's own life. Every scene recreated with stunt doubles, every line of dialogue hastily improvised, every fight that was half done, all of it was a reflection of how he lived, fast, intense, with no time for regrets. And then, one stormy night, the studio caught fire. The firefighters arrived too late. The flames consumed the sets, the film reels, even the walls covered in old posters. When the sun rose, only a charred structure remained, and, amid the ash, a single intact page from Bruce's notebook. If I die tomorrow, it won't be because I fought too little. It will be because I lived too long. And so, as always, Bruce won. Not because he defeated death, but because he defied it until the last second. The world continued to change, new fighters emerged, cinema evolved, martial arts transformed. But somewhere, among the memories of those who saw him fight and the screens that still show his films, he remains. Not like a ghost. As a reminder. The last round. The news spread like wildfire, literally. When the morning newspapers printed the photo of the ruined studio, with the caption "Golden Dragon Studio Tragedy, Fire Destroys Bruce Lee's Legacy," the world held its breath. Some said it was an accident, a short circuit in the old electrical installations. Others whispered that there was something more behind the flames, something Bruce had already sensed in his final days. Among the rubble, in addition to the surviving page of his notebook, they also found a slightly charred but intact metal box. Inside it, rolls of film that no one knew existed. They were new scenes, rehearsals of choreographies that Bruce had recorded in the previous months, as if he knew that time was running out. There was also a letter, addressed to Linda, his wife, written in the same firm handwriting as the training notes. If you're reading this, it's because I'm already gone. Don't cry for me. I lived every second like it was my last, and that's more than most people can say. Take care of our children. Teach Brandon that strength isn't just in your fists, but in the courage to stand up when the world knocks you down. And to Shannon, tell her that the dragon her father left behind isn't made of fire, but of dreams. She'll understand when it's time. Linda read the letter in silence, her fingers trembling over the paper. It wasn't the first time Bruce talked about death as if it were an imminent certainty. He always said that living intensely was the only way to beat time. But now, faced with those words, she felt the weight of reality. He was gone. And, somehow, I already knew I would leave. Legacy in the shadows. The months that followed were chaotic. The studio, once buzzing with activity, was now a monument to Bruce's memory. Fans left flowers, letters, and even boxing gloves at the feet of what remained of the entrance. Some said they saw his shadow moving among the ruins, as if he were still there, watching. But Bruce's true legacy wasn't in the rubble. It was in the films that survived, in the tapes that had been copied and distributed before the fire. The Chinese Dragon, Rage of the Dragon, Flight of the Dragon, each has become a landmark, not just in martial arts cinema, but in pop culture as a whole. And then came the unreleased tapes, the ones found in the metal box. They were brutal, almost documentary scenes, of Bruce training, teaching, philosophizing. One of them, in particular, caught the world's attention. It was a home recording, made by a student in Hong Kong. Bruce, bare-chested and sweat glistening in the sunlight, spoke directly to the camera as he demonstrated a move. Most people think fighting is about strength. It's not. It's about flowing. Like water. You can't break water because it adapts. It finds a way. Be like water, my friend. The phrase echoed around the world, repeated in interviews, printed on t-shirts, tattooed on the skin of fighters and dreamers. The dragon that never died. Years later, in a small dojo in Seattle, a 10-year-old boy named Jake watched a worn-out VHS tape of the Chinese Dragon. He had found the tape in the basement of his grandfather's house, an old sailor who, decades earlier, had trained with Bruce in Hong Kong. The boy was mesmerized by the screen, by the impossible movements, by the energy that seemed to jump from the television. "Who's that?" Jake asked his grandfather, who was watching from the door. The old man smiled, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and sadness. That was Bruce. The man who changed everything. Jake didn't know it, but that moment would be the beginning of his own journey. He began training, first in secret, then with his grandfather's blessing. Years later, he would become one of the biggest names in mixed martial arts, carrying with him not only Bruce's techniques, but his philosophy. "Be like water," he said in interviews, repeating the words that had changed his life. The reunion. In 1993, almost 20 years after the fire, a team of amateur archaeologists decided to explore the ruins of the Golden Dragon studio. Among the rubble, they found something unexpected, a wall that had resisted the fire, covered in inscriptions in Chinese and English. They were Bruce's phrases, hastily scribbled during filming breaks. "Fear is the greatest enemy. Don't let it win. Perfection is not a destination, but a journey. I am not afraid of the man who has trained 10,000 kicks. I am afraid of the man who has trained one kick 10,000 times." In the center of the wall was a symbol drawn in charcoal, a dragon curled into a circle. Below it, a last message. "To anyone who finds this, I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who refused to stop. Now it's your turn." The discovery reignited interest in Bruce's legacy. Books were written, documentaries produced, and even a new studio was built in the same location, called Dragon's Legacy. But the real impact was on the people. In every fighter who got up after a defeat, in every artist who persisted despite criticism, in every dreamer who refused to give up. Bruce was gone, but his voice still echoed. Not as a ghost, but as a reminder that life is not measured by how long it lasts, but by the intensity with which it is lived. And somewhere, between the memories and the screens, he continued to fight.